Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert, covering a woke judge getting destroyed for calling the court system racist. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. From above the law, black judge said diversity is good, so her colleagues launched a disciplinary probe. No, that is not what happened, as you can imagine. Let's take a look at the New York Times. From the New York Times, remarks on diversity lead to investigation of North Carolina judge. A justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court is being investigated by a state judicial commission after saying a report of bias in the judiciary should be examined. A little bit more sensible. This is a judge that does not want to be investigated. She has been fighting the investigation in court. From Reuters, North Carolina justice loses bid to block diversity critique ethics probe. And just out today, she hasn't been able to block the investigation of her unethical comments, so she's now filed an appeal to appeals court, desperate to try to block it. Why would she be blocking it if all she said was diversity was good? Well, she didn't just say diversity is good, and we will look at exactly what she said. This interview took place with Law360.com, and the whole purpose of the interview was to get this judge to comment on diversity. They ask her, why are oral advocates that come before the North Carolina Supreme Court, and they're talking about attorneys, overwhelmingly male and white despite a diverse state population and state bar membership? Part of it is the current pool of who's eligible to argue in front of us, and then who decides who gets to do the arguments. But then beyond that, what is the pipeline to arguing in front of us? If you look at who is hired to serve as clerks to the justices, we have plenty of female clerks, but on a racial diversity, we're lacking. For the term that just started in January, there were 14 or 15 law clerks serving in our court and no African Americans, one Latina. I think another part of this, in terms of the gender and race discrepancies that you see, I really do think implicit bias is at play. And here's their definition of implicit bias. Implicit bias is a form of bias that occurs automatically and unintentionally that nevertheless affects judgments, decisions, and behaviors. Research has shown implicit bias can pose a barrier to recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce. So the premise with them with implicit bias is it doesn't matter if you say you're not racist. It doesn't matter if you don't, quote, act racist. You're racist because we say you're racist, and we also base that on your skin color. That doesn't sound very fair. Well, it's not fair. It's a tyranny. There have been cases where I have felt very uncomfortable on the bench because I feel like my colleagues are unfairly cutting off a female advocate. We have so few people of color argue in front of us, but in one case there was a black woman who argued in front of us, and I felt like she was being attacked unfairly, not allowed to answer the question, interrupted. It's not uniform. It's not in every case. And so it could certainly factor in the politics of the particular case that's being argued. She's on a bench with a number of other judges. She's the woke judge. The other judges aren't woke. So she is trash talking her judicial colleagues on that bench. Imagine if someone from the Supreme Court of the United States started talking about basically how implicitly racist everyone else is on the court. We ought to get ready for that because we might hear it with some of the people that are on the bench right now. Incredibly inappropriate. So when that is the culture of our court, that is to say, when the culture is that male advocates and advocates who reflect the majority of the court, white advocates, when they get more respect, when they are treated better, I think it filters into people's calculations about who should argue and who's likely to get the best reception and who can be the most persuasive. Because you wouldn't want to hire an attorney to argue your case in front of her court if her court is so racist they aren't even going to listen to the attorney that you hire. That's what she's saying. I'm not suggesting that any of this is conscious, intentional racial animus. But I do think that our court system, like any other court system, is made up of human beings, and I believe the research that shows that we all have implicit biases. Again, when I say that you have an implicit bias, and I wouldn't insult you that way, but if I were to say that, I'd be saying that you are a racist You don't even know it. So now do what I tell you to do so you're not so racist. Be anti-racist. That's why this woman is being investigated. What efforts have been made to diversify the appellate bench, which is largely male and white? Under the prior court, there was an equity committee looking at these issues. That committee was disbanded at the beginning of this year. That was an internal equity committee to look at just the North Carolina Supreme Court and our hiring practices. That's an issue too. The prior court had also issued an order appointing a Commission of Fairness and Equity in the North Carolina judicial system. It dealt with not only how we treat the public, but how we operate internally. It dealt with gender as well as race. It was established by order of the court in October 2020. And then in January of 2023, the Chief Justice refused to reappoint members of that committee. Oh, so he didn't want to have a woke, socialist, communist equity board overseeing all the activities of the court? Right, that's how come it didn't get reappointments, because it's a completely inappropriate oversight of the court system. There's been no attention to that because it's all been done very quietly. It's not like there's a big press conference. The new majority on the court didn't issue a new court order saying we're superseding the old order. It's in line with the values of the current party in power in our court. The new members of our court very much see themselves as a conservative bloc. They talk about themselves as, quote, the conservatives. Their allegiance is to their ideology, not the institution. When she says something like their allegiance is to their ideology, not the institution, she's saying not her, but her fellow justices on the court are abusing their authority for their own personal points of view. She would never do that, of course. But she's saying all them are doing it. Very different than just being a black judge saying that diversity is good, isn't it? Have you faced obstacles that you attribute to your gender or race on your journey to becoming an appellate advocate or Supreme Court judge? Both, yes. I had to have very sharp elbows sometimes. I got further along in my career to say, look, I have 25 years experience. You're not going to shut me out of this litigation strategy decision. So just to be in the position to ultimately be the person who gets to argue the case on appeal, there were certainly challenges as a female litigator. In terms of being on the court, interestingly, I didn't feel any barriers running for office. I didn't feel like voters had any preconceived notions that I couldn't be an appellate judge just because I was a woman. You may wonder, what about all this implicit bias you keep talking about? But that's not convenient for this point she's trying to make, so it doesn't exist. But I certainly think that now that I'm on the bench, I see ways in which I'm treated differently by my colleagues during oral argument, and sometimes it's hard to separate out. Is this race, or is this gender, or is this because of my political views? Any one of those three, or the combination of all three, might be the explanation. I've been interrupted by more junior colleagues, and I've had to say, excuse me, I'm not finished with my question. And less often, or less striking to me, but still occasionally happens, is attorneys who won't let me get my question out. That just doesn't happen to my male colleagues. These judges are in a position to sanction the attorneys in front of them if the attorneys were acting inappropriately. It's just her own personal demeanor, obviously. There were 2 times when one of my colleagues publicly tried to embarrass me, and in the context of the case and the oral argument, that's just not only my perception. Other people in the courtroom at the time were shocked and surprised, because that isn't how our court operates, at least in the past. Sometimes some of these judges that don't really know what they're doing, and I haven't seen this judge operate, but some judges just go on and on and on, talking and talking and talking inappropriately and pontificating, and then they get shut up. People interrupt them. That may be what happened to her, or maybe there's a conspiracy against her. Are there implicit bias trainings offered to North Carolina's justices? Well, there were. I am co-chair of the governor's task force on racial equity and criminal justice, created following George Floyd's death in 2020. One of our first recommendations was that all judicial system actors have implicit bias and racial equity training. So she wants to come in and call everyone else except her, or whoever else agrees with her. She wants to call everyone else in the court system racist, and she wants them to take her brainwashing courses to deal with their racism so that they can learn to agree with her about all of her points of view and her ideology. The University of North Carolina School of Government developed a curriculum. Some trial court judges attended their implicit bias training, and then when the new Chief Justice came into office in January 2021, he ended that by renegotiating the contract with the School of Government. It's no longer being offered to judges. I think that's part of the general antipathy towards seeing that racial issues matter in our justice system. The current Chief Justice, at the time, wrote a dissent to the order creating the Commission on Fairness and Equity, in which he basically said that he thought the timing of the order was political, that the text of the order improperly prejudged issues of racial discrimination, and that it improperly inserts the judiciary into the policymaking arena. So it's a very political issue. And the current party in power doesn't think that there are any problems of racial discrimination in our justice system. And so why would you have training on implicit racial bias if there's no such thing as racial discrimination or racial bias, right? That's their worldview. What's fascinating about this is they can't point to any real examples of bias or poor treatment or discrimination or people not getting an opportunity they shouldn't have got. They just want to call everyone racist and force them to believe and do whatever they tell them to do. And they're wondering, why are we getting resistance to this? Because we do not belong to your cult. What can be done to increase diversity on the bench? It can be really challenging to figure out how you're going to run for office and keep a full-time job. Because for me, running for office was a full-time job, and I could only do it when I had the financial means to go without income for a year. It was only after 30 years of practicing law with both my kids out of college could I finally say I can go without an income for a year. So I think there's a barrier at the appellate level. What would you tell women and people of color hoping to join North Carolina's appellate bench or appellate bar? It would break my heart to think that people are discouraged from doing appellate work because they don't want to face these hurdles. What hurdles? Sometimes people don't want to hear you talk endlessly? That's the hurdle? I think the message I would give is it's twice as important that you do this. You can find resources to help you surmount the hurdles. Or she could create an organization and donate her time. She could donate money. She could bring awareness to it. But if you're going to call your colleagues racist, then you're going to get investigated. And here's the investigation she's facing. The 16-member Judicial Standards Commission notified Earls in August that it was examining whether her comments may have violated the North Carolina Code of Judicial Conduct by alleging her colleagues were, quote, acting out of racial, gender, and or political bias in some of their decision-making, which she absolutely did. It's black and white. There's no question there. She needs to be disciplined. The panel is examining whether her actions violated Canon 2A of the Code of Judicial Conduct, which requires a judge to conduct herself at all times in a manner which promotes public confidence in the integrity and impartiality of the judiciary. Earls, in a lawsuit filed in August, called the commission's actions a blatant attempt to chill my First Amendment rights to freedom of speech under the U.S. Constitution, which had prompted her to turn down opportunities to speak and write. So far, she's been failing in her attempt to block the investigation. She's lost in federal court. She's filing with an appeals court. I'll keep an eye on this story and let you know if anything happens with it. But obviously, she's not being investigated because she said that diversity is good. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.